Trishik, you may start now.
Yes, sir. I hope I'm clearly audible.
Yes, you are.
Good evening to everyone present here. I welcome you all to today's webinar on the topic Rule-Based International Order on Russian Invasion of Ukraine, organized by PCGT in collaboration with Government Law College Mumbai. Public Concern for Governance Trust is a registered trust founded by late Mr. B.G. Deshmukh, Mr. Julio Ribeiro, and Dr. R.K. Anand in the year 2002 with an objective to promote honesty, transparency, and good governance by increasing public participation and involvement of youth in the process of governance through its verticals, namely RTI, RTS, Kuch or Youth for Governance, and Youth Leadership and Development Programs. The Government Law College Mumbai has a heritage spanning over a century and a half and has dominated the legal landscape of India since its inception in 1855. This esteemed institution enjoys the distinction of being Asia's oldest law college. Generations of distinguished legal luminaries who have been nurtured by this unique institution have made seminal contribution to the evolution of India's legal system. The college has consistently maintained high standards of education by emphasizing on crucial balance between academics, co-curricular, and extracurricular activities. The NSS unit of Government Law College Mumbai, under the guidance of our beloved program officer, Krutika Temburnikar ma'am, is relentlessly working on the lines of the motto, not me, but you. Government Law College NSS unit has been actively organizing awareness webinars and activities. Now, to proceed further, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Navashika Duara. Ma'am is an academician with a teaching experience of over 20 years. By her self-admission, she finds her true self in the classroom. She is equally passionate about research. With a doctorate in the area of ethnicity, she has been writing extensively on areas related to democratic governance, the domestic compulsions of foreign policy formulation, changing dimensions of rule based international order, to name a few. She was selected by the US State Department for the prestigious leadership program in the area of foreign policy. An avid traveler, she feels that true insight into a multi ethnic society is best seen through the lens of a traveler. As an administrator, she believes in continuing her effort in creating a society where the youth looks at societal problems objectively without being clouded by prejudice. I hereby request Dr. Navashika Duara ma'am to address the participants.
Mute. Yeah, hello. Yeah, yes. Thank you very much for a kind introduction to me. Am I audible and visible? Am I audible and visible?
Yes,
Loud
ma'am.
enough?
Yes,
Clear?
ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. In the beginning, I thank PCGT for giving me a platform for addressing the students. I always love to be with the students and share my observation and thoughts. So what I'm doing today is basically sharing my observation on the attempt to create a rule-based international order. Particularly, people are with the ongoing Russian-Ukraine conflict. Even lay persons are getting interested in understanding what exactly is the rule-based international order, because we have been hearing everyone talking about it, whether you listen to the radio or watch a TV show, everywhere you hear about the rule-based international order. But most of us don't we need to understand what exactly mean by rule-based international order. Can you compare with a domestic rule-based order? Number one. Number two is that what are we talking about? We are talking about a rule-based international order creating among states which are sovereign equals, and that speaks a volume a lot about the difficulty and challenges that goes in creating a rule-based international order. I have divided my lecture into a couple of segments. First segment will be taking the participants to an understanding of how the modern system of sovereign states have come into existence. So we'll be taking a kind of an understanding about the emergence of independent sovereign states, of which the present world is composed of. That will be the first part of the discussion. Second part of the discussion will be why and how the international community decided to go for a rule-based international order. I mean, what is the necessity? What compelled the sovereign states, all of them are sovereign equals, to go for a rule-based international order, and how a beginning has been made. Then the third part of the conclusion part will be the challenges in the context of taking Russia, Ukraine as a case study to understand the more deeply into the working of the rule-based international order. Any questions from any of the participants? Okay. So if there's no question, then I go ahead with the first part of the presentation. First of all, I would like to say that the present world order is composed of states which are independent, sovereign, political entity organized on the principle of territoriality and nationality. So that is what the political landscape of the world is today. The world is composed of states which are independent, sovereign, political entity organized on the principle of territoriality and nationality. This description of state speaks a lot about the difficulty that will arise in the way of creating a rule-based international order. If we go to the making a beginning, if we have to say, any student of international relations, if they are asked, what is the beginning of the modern independent nation states, they will say the beginning of the modern independent nation states is the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia. So therefore, in many international journals or many writings, we often refer to the world as a Westphalian state system. Now, what is the Treaty of Westphalia? The Treaty of Westphalia ended a year of turmoil in Europe. There were 2 wars in Europe. Apparently, these 2 wars, mostly it was fought for religious reasons. And it was primarily the Protestant Reformation movement. The Reformation movement resulted in dividing the Christianity into 2 parts. So the domination of the Pope, the authority of the Pope, significantly diminished, and with that there was a beginning of the decline of the Holy Roman Empire. Taking advantage of the religious freedom that was given to the rulers to decide or to practice a religion of their choice, not necessarily the Roman Catholic religion, unlike in the past, when in the past under the Holy Roman Empire, all the kings were required to follow the religion of Roman Catholicism only. But with the Protestant Reformative movement, the different empires, the different kings, they wanted to, under the Holy Roman Empire, they wanted to practice a religion. So ultimately, the religious freedom was given to the kings to practice a religion of their choice. Taking advantage of the newfound religion, the different kings, the different feudal lords, the different nobles of the Holy Roman Empire started claiming a kind of a supremacy which was not known to them earlier. So they started claiming a supremacy which was not known to them earlier. So they started, in other words, the idea of sovereignty, the idea of the ruler being the sovereign authority within her defined territory, started emerging slowly, because they started assuming, taking advantage of the newfound religious freedom, all the rulers under the Holy Roman Empire started claiming a kind of sovereignty, a kind of supremacy, which was not known to them before. So that is the beginning of the whole journey of the state as we know today. So the Treaty of Westphalia was signed, which ended the 30 years war, 80 years war, and this signaled the beginning of the modern nation state. So therefore, we call the nation state today as the Westphalian nation state system. So if we have to mark the beginning of the nation state system, we go back to Westphalia. The Treaty of Westphalia is significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, it provided an opportunity, it provided an alternative of settling disputes. The diplomacy can be a mean to settle disputes other than war. So this year, 1648, was significant for a number of reasons. Number one, beginning of a ruler who was sovereign. So that give a kind of a, you can say it marked the beginning of modern independent sovereign states. Second importance of the Treaty of Westphalia was that diplomacy, beginning of diplomacy. Apart from the use of war, force, the two horrible wars made the European rulers understand that there should be an alternative to war. So diplomatic conference, diplomacy as an alternative solution to war started, or as an alternative solution to settlement of issues among and between the rulers started. So that is the second significance of the Treaty of Westphalia. And as I said earlier, if we have to talk about secularization and tolerization, the idea of secularism and tolerization, that the Treaty of Westphalia also marked the beginning. So this is what we have to keep it in mind when you speak about a rule-based international order, because unless and until we understand the rule-based international order, among whom we are talking about getting the states which are sovereign, which have got internal sovereignty within her territory. They're supreme internally, and they are free from outside interference. And among them, we are talking about a rule-based international order. Okay, any questions from anyone? No. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So then we go to the second part of the presentation. What is the need of having a rule-based international order among the states which are sovereign equals? The need is that every nation state have got certain amount of force at its disposal. At the same time, nation states cannot remain in isolation. They need to interact with each other. No states are completely self-sufficient. So there has to be interaction, there has to be cross-border relations. And whenever there is an interaction, cross-border relations among the nation states, there's bound to be conflict, there's bound to be issues. So in cooperation also, there can be issues of conflict, and otherwise also there can be issues of conflict. Like, to give you an example, there is a trade cooperation, like for instance, US and China, United States of America and People's Republic of China. There's a cooperation between them, among them regarding trade. However, in trade cooperation also they have conflicting issues. So therefore,
We have suddenly lost your voice.
Ma'am, your voice has become too low. We cannot hear you, ma'am. Maybe if you rejoin the meeting, I think then it would come back.
Raj, I am trying to call Shikha ma'am. Kavita here. I'm trying to
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah, I just spoke to her. She's trying to join.
Yeah.
Let us wait for 2 3 minutes.
Ma'am, you are muted. Shikha ma'am.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, but the voice is too low.
Voice is too low. I don't
Yes,
know
ma'am.
what is happening.
Oh, it's
No, it
back.
is clear. It is clear.
Yeah.
Is it clear for everybody,
Yes.
or is it clear for only for clear?
Yes,
It is
ma'am.
clear.
Okay. So where I dropped out, like I don't know, because I finished. I finished with this. How the beginning of the modern nation state happened, and then I was moving into the necessity of having a rule-based international order, in which I pointed out that no nation state is self-sufficient, and they need to interact with each other, and out of that interaction there can be conflicting issues. Either in cooperation there can be conflicting issues, or in other ways also there can be conflicting issues. I have covered up to here, and I have given the example of how US and United States of America and the PRC, while they have the largest trading partner, they do have trade issues to deal with. Similarly, India, Pakistan, okay, we have a lot of issues with each other regarding boundary dispute.
Ma'am, the voice has again become low.
Voice is not there.
I cannot hear you, ma'am.
Shikha ma'am, we can't hear you. Can you please try from your mobile? I think it will be better because maybe sometimes you can try to connect from your mobile.
Ma'am, we cannot hear you. I've sent the link on your WhatsApp.
Shikha ma'am, just take my WhatsApp call. Just take my WhatsApp call. I'll try to help you. Just take my call. 910 122 6700 and uska password is PCGT 2022. Shikha ma'am, just unmute yourself and you can speak now. Just unmute yourself on your mobile.
Am I?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible now.
But then
Echo आ रहा था.
You leave from the laptop.
Echo voice is coming.
Yeah, we'll just solve it.
yeah, now it is audible, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, it's audible.
Too much it is. Anyway, I don't know why it never happened like this earlier. Okay, anyway, I think it will be terribly little bit of disturbance. And anyway, Raz, I'm so sorry about it. I don't know why it has happened like this. Never it has happened like this, you know. Can we continue now?
Yes, yes, it happens, Shikha ma'am. It happens.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You can continue. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So coming to this point of the interaction, like I have said that in cross-border interaction makes it necessary to have a kind of a system which will be in place whenever there is a issues of conflict, whether in the matter of water sharing, whether in the matter of boundary dispute, and so on. Especially after the First World War, we have the edifice of League of Nations, and after that, Second World War created the United Nations. So the United Nations provided a framework. The beginning, you can say one of the landmark framework is provided under the UN Charter, which is like mostly we go to Article 2 of the UN Charter. I would like the participants to make a note of Article 2. All the 5 clauses of Article 2 of the UN Charter is very significant in respect of the terminology that we are talking about, a rule-based international order, because we are talking about states which are sovereign equals. And if we're talking about states which are sovereign equals, unlike a domestic system where there is a supreme authority, where there's a common sovereign authority making the legislations. So there is no common lawmaking body. So the law that we are talking about, the international law that we are talking about, is arising out of the consent of the states, whether in the form of treaty laws or in the form of customary state practices backed by open year juris. So now, so therefore, we have to refer to the UN Charter. It's like a kind of a framework which provides, it's a treaty law, it's a multilateral treaty, which total membership of the UN is 193 states, and all the Article 1 of the UN Charter talks about, I mean, membership, that the main objective of the UN is to maintain its peace and security in the world. And we also know that membership of the UN is open only to sovereign independent states who are willing to fulfill the obligations as given in the UN Charter. So therefore, Article 1 and Article 2 of the UN Charter is very significant in terms of creating a rule-based international order. So Article 2, particularly, we have to, if you take a reading of Article 2 of the UN Charter, we will find that there are certain do's and do nots for from the that we have to learn from Article 2. First thing is Article 2, Clause 1 talks about is that the principle of sovereign equality. Article 2, Clause 1 of the UN Charter recognizes the sovereign equality of nation states. So that is the first principle on which edifies the rule-based international order is created. the principle of sovereign equality. Each sovereign state is equal to every other sovereign state, irrespective of the size, irrespective of the wealth. Second principle, second subclause of Article 2 is that all member states are required to faithfully fulfill all the obligations imposed on them by way of the UN Charter. This is another significant principle that every student of international relations has to keep it in mind when we're talking about a rule-based international order. Third principles is that all member states shall have an obligation to settle their disputes by peaceful means without resort to application of force. In fact, Article 2, Clause 4 is very, very important, which we have been hearing in recent days. Two articles mostly we are listening to. One is principle of sovereign equality, which I have already pointed out, which is there in Article 2, Clause 1 of the UN Charter, and Article 2, Clause 4, which prohibits a member state. There's a prohibition on the member state to use, to give a threat or use of force, threat to use force or actual use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. So this is something that we need to keep it in mind. So this is the framework which is provided under the UN Charter to create a kind of a rule-based system, a kind of a legal regime in dealing with each other. So every nation state is under obligation to respect the sovereign equality, territorial integrity of another state, to refrain from the threat or actual use of force against the territorial integrity of another state, not to interfere in the territorial matters of internal matters of another state, and most important is not to support, not to provide any assistance to any state against whom enforcement or preventive measures have been taken by the United Nations. So I will suggest all the participants to have a look at Article 2 of the UN Charter, which provides the framework for a rule-based international order. And having said this, although we say these are the 5 parameters around which an attempt has been made to create a rule-based international order, apart from this UN Charter, there are other frameworks by which the different regimes have been created, whether in the field of climate cooperation, whether to deal with the matter of global warming, to deal with the matter of arms control, or to deal with the matter of disarmament. Everything is arising out of these 5 principles. Okay. So, but having said this, having providing this brief framework of creating an attempt to have a rule-based international order, because without this framework, every nation state, whenever they have an issue at hand, they might go to settle the disputes by way of use of force, and every state has got certain amount of force at their disposal, and irresponsible use of force might pose a danger to the peace and security of the world. So therefore, this framework has been provided. Having said this, another thing that we have to keep it in mind is that the order that we are talking about, the rule-based international order we are talking about, is applicable to sovereign states, states which are sovereign equals, number 1, states which are driven by national interest. By the realist assumptions, all the states are driven only by national interest. They are only concerned with protection, promotion, preservation of national interest. So a peculiar situation develops in the world political landscape. On one side, nations are interacting with each other. So there are 3 C's and there are 3 P's. So there is conflicting situation, there is cooperation, and there is competition among the nation states. And in competition, in collaboration, and in conflict, each of the member states try to maximize their national interests. So whatever they're doing, whether they're competing with each other, whether they're having a conflicting situation, whether they're collaborating with other states, they are doing everything in order to maximize national interest, protection, promotion, preservation of national interest. This reality of the world society, this reality of the family of nation states makes the rule-based international order a kind of an illusion. I will call it a kind of an illusion because every state is driven only by national interest. As Hans Morgenthau once famously said, the struggle for power among nation states is the reality of international politics. Every nation state tries to maximize their national interest. They want to preserve their national interest. They want to promote their national interest. They want to protect their national interest. So if that is the case, the international law that we are talking about, whether coming by way of treaty law in the form of the UN Charter or coming by way of customary international law by way of state practice, all are an illusion. So this is what I wanted to submit before the participants of this webinar. Any question? Then any questions from anybody? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, absolutely, ma'am.
When I move to the next part regarding the case study that we are going to taking up in order to understand that how different states, like, if you take the Ukrainian, Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is a classic violation of the principle of Article 2, respect that, so that all states are sovereign equal. So therefore, Ukraine has, as a sovereign state, has a right to take her own decisions, whether it wants to join the NATO, whether it wants to be part of the European Union. This is supposed to be the Ukrainian call, because if Russia is a sovereign nation state, Ukraine is also a sovereign nation state. Article 2, Clause 1 of the UN Charter has made it very clear that all of them are sovereign Ukraine. The organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members. So whether Ukraine or Russia, both of them are sovereign nation states. So therefore, Ukraine wanting to be a member of the NATO or wanting to be a member of the European Union should not be objected by Russia. However, the reality is far from that. As I told you earlier, every nation state is driven by the 3 Ps. So national interest, protection, promotion, or preservation of national interest. After the end of the Cold War, Ukraine's moving towards the Western Bloc, especially after 2014, the real independence of Ukraine, the pro-Russian president being removed, and there was a huge protest against the pro-Russian president, because the pro-Russian president was not willing to sign the trade agreement with the European Union. And that resulted in a protest movement, civilian movements. And ultimately, the pro-Russian president was removed, Ukrainian president was removed, and Zelensky came into power. And that created a rift between Ukraine and Russia, and resulting in Russia's annexation of Crimea. Crimea's strategic importance to Russia, everybody knows about it, the presence of Russian naval presence in the Baltic Sea. And apart from that, it provides a significant route to Russia for her trade and commerce. So Crimea is always strategically important for Russia. And in 2014, Crimea was annexed by Russia, and which has been already an illegal act. And in the midst of all this, when Zelensky started taking a negotiation for joining the NATO or applied for membership of the European Union, that was considered to be a threat to Russia, because Putin has been observing the movement of the former Warsaw Pact countries. Former Warsaw Pact countries, we know that during the Cold War, there were 2 distinct blocks of military alliance. One side was the NATO bloc, that is the capitalist bloc. Other side was the Warsaw member states, which is the socialist bloc. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw military alliance is no longer functional, and many of the former Soviet satellite states, many of the former Warsaw countries, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, and all of them have joined the NATO bloc. So Ukraine trying to be taking a membership of NATO did not go well with Putin, and apart from European Union. So it is like my national interest is at stake, my strategic interest at stake. I don't want the real reason is that I don't want a pro-Western power in my backyard. I don't want a pro-Western power in my backyard. So they started making presenting, in order to legitimize their case of interfering in Russia, interfering in Ukraine, they started building up a case of legitimacy, saying that it is about demilitarization of Ukraine and denazification. And of course, all of us know these 2 points, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, has no valid standard. There's no validity about it. There's no legitimacy about it. There is no kind of a Russian separatist rebels that are there in the eastern part of Ukraine. Okay, there is no kind of a genocide, unlike as claimed by Russia. Okay, so whatever they are trying to do in order to actually protect, promote, and preserve her national interests, apparently arising out of the threat of Ukraine going towards the Western Bloc. They have given sufficient warning to Ukraine. In fact, the peace negotiation is apparently not going through because of the fact that they want Ukraine not to take the membership of NATO, or in fact, they are talking about division of Ukraine into two different parts, like how it has happened in case of Vietnam or in case of North Korea. So now let's look at what the other nation states stand on this whole conflict, in the whole conflict that we are saying. First of all, we need to understand that a kind of a situation has been created that either we have to be with peace or we have to be in aggression. There appears not to be a middle pact. But countries like India have, because India has been very jealously guarding her autonomy in foreign policy. Since the very beginning of our independence, India has been guarding her autonomy in foreign policy decisions. So she doesn't want to be that is the reason that India has started with the non-aligned movement. This is the necessity of India's national interest, because coming out of foreign rule, coming out of colonial rule, India never wanted to be in the Cold War rivalry. So neither India wanted to be in the capitalist bloc nor wanted to be socialist bloc, and NAM was basically coming out of that. So even today, India has been jealously guarding her foreign policy autonomy by maintaining a equidistance both from the socialist bloc as well as from the capitalist bloc. Now, the Russian aggression in invasion of Ukraine and Russian war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine have put India on a tight spot. The voting, India has so far abstained herself from voting in the UNSC or in the UN General Assembly. The most important point was about the voting that India has to exercise in the United Nations Human Rights Council for gross violation of human rights war crimes illicitly committed by Russia in Ukraine. We have been seeing horrifying image of Ukrainian Russian soldiers committing war crimes in different areas of Ukraine, bombing of hospitals, bombing of theaters, torture, or so many other horrifying images are appearing. Against this background, as a democratic nation state committed to upholding human rights, the voting of India in United Nations Human Rights Council was something which the whole world was observing. Will India abstain, or will India say yes for suspension of Russia from the Human Rights Council? And India, as predicted by many, took the step which was many expected India to take, is that abstain from the abstain from voting. China voted. If you look at the key India's alliance, now India has alliance with two peculiar alliance. Now, if you look at the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa. And if you look at it in the BRICS, China voted against it. Russia, of course, is the LS committer, allegedly committing the crime. Brazil, India, and South Africa abstain from the voting. So there is a kind of a understanding among the BRICS country. And the point that India pointed out is that why India is voting, giving the reason why India has voted against it. She pointed it out that when the inquiry of commission is not yet completed, this kind of a step of Russian expansion from Human Rights Council might be is not conducive. It might accelerate the conflict. Okay, so what I mean to say that if we take India's stand on the Russian aggression, of course, Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been saying that whatever is happening in Ukraine is express a matter of concern, that India is concerned about whatever is happening in Ukraine. However, India is continuing her friendship with Russia. Now, why India has to continue her friendship with Russia? If India is a upholder of democracy, largest democracy in the world, upholder of human rights, what compelling India, apart from the fact that we want to maintain autonomy in our foreign policy decisions, the reason that India is not standing with the Western world in condemning, full-scale condemnation of Russian action in Ukraine. The reason is that that's India's defense requirement. Even though significantly we have reduced our dependency on Russia, we are still depending on Russia for our defense equipment. And in fact, USA has been saying that with the sanctions, it will be difficult for India to get the spare parts. So therefore, you should come closer to us. But there is a kind of a situation that if India has to accept USA in place of Russia, will USA will be a better friend to India than Russia? Russia has been, it has been always said it is our time-tested friendship. So we are not, what will be the repercussion if India moves away from being closer to Russia and moves away to USA? Is USA willing to provide India the defense equipments at a competitive rate? Because the defense equipment that we buy from Russia is at a very competitive rate. And in fact, taking into account the sanctions, Russia is offering the rupee-ruble sanctions. Okay, rupee-ruble trade for trade conducting, facilitating trade between India and Russia. In fact, as a symbolic gesture, we also bought oil from Russia. And see the hypocrisy of the Western world when their energy sanction is not yet there. So that particular time, they're asking us to stop buying oil from Russia. When the Europe can buy oil from Russia, so why can't we buy oil? So what I'm trying to tell you is that whatever sanctions that we are talking about on Russia arising out of Russian actions in Ukraine, if you minutely observe everything, every nation state in enforcing the sanction also trying to preserve our national interests. You look at Germany. Germany has not been willing to impose energy sanction because Germany's energy is entirely dependent on Russia. So the whole in rule-based international order enforcement organ of the UN, which is the United Security Council, under Chapter 7, UN can take enforcement measures against a particular state, not for enforcing, not for maintenance of peace and security, but not only for maintaining of peace and security, not for upholding the law. Like when there is a threat to peace, breach of peace, acts of aggression, the UNSC can take enforcement measures, not to enforce the law. So that is the difference between the rule-based international order that we are talking about and the rule-based domestic order that we are talking about. In case of domestic space, if there is a violation of law, there is a enforcement machinery that will come into force immediately. We cannot compare that with the UNSC as an enforcement organ. UNSC doesn't have the sanction behind it, so therefore it can take enforcement measures against a particular state only when there is a threat to peace, breach of peace, and acts of aggression. Now there has been a talk about getting Putin under ICC, and here also I find a double standard. USA, who has not taken the ICC membership, it considers that International Criminal Court doesn't have any kind of authority, doesn't have any legitimacy to investigate any kind of war crimes or crime against humanity committed by the American soldiers or American personnel abroad, be in the case of Afghanistan or in Iraq. So they have totally not recognized that ICC's authority, ICC's legitimacy, insofar as their action is concerned. We also know that Donald Trump has gone to the extent of imposing sanction against the ICC prosecutors when in 2020 a case was initiated against USA for war crimes in Afghanistan. So now the same USA is talking about bringing Russia, bringing Putin under ICCI, International Criminal Court jurisdiction. So we find a kind of a hypocrisy when we talk about taking action against Putin, and then when this different powers is talking about upholding a rule-based international order, everyone need to take a reality check and need to understand that whatever actually happens within the legal framework of international order, everybody will follow the legal order as long as it promotes our national interest. The moment the national interest is threatened, the moment there is a challenge to the national interest, every state will deviate start deviating from that rule-based international order. And that is the difficulty in creating a rule-based international order under the present system, in which the primary actor, that is the state, is a sovereign independent entity. With this, I think I can close. I don't have more to share. I'm open to questions or clarification. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Yeah.
Participants, if any questions, you can put it into chat box, or you can unmute yourselves.
If you want me to explain some more points, I can explain. But this is the brief framework that I wanted to share.
Ma'am, you've gone on mute. Yeah.
We are talking about the rule-based international order that we are talking about is actually an illusion. It is a kind of a reason that has been created by the nation states out of their own consent. So the international law, which is supposed to govern this rule-based international order, is entirely based on the consent of the nation states. There is no common supreme authority, and accordingly, the enforcement, whenever there is a threat to this rule-based international order, who will take enforcement measures? We have the UNSC in place as an enforcement organ of the UN. However, the UNSC can take actions only when there is a threat to peace, peace of peace, and acts of aggression. And everybody knows that taking enforcement measures against any of the veto-wielding permanent members of the UNSC becomes really difficult. And another important point that we need to understand is that when you look at Russia's conduct in Ukraine, it obvious that Russia is trying to protect, preserve, and promote our national interests, and the West reaction to it, okay, is entirely against kind of a hypocrisy. Because I have given you the example about USA. USA has never accepted ICC jurisdiction, but then the USA is talking about bringing Putin under ICC jurisdiction. Now the question is that how do you bring Putin under ICC jurisdiction? Because ICC will never hear a case in absentia. So who will go and arrest Putin? So that is the biggest question that arises. So although we are talking about that we can, so it is the case will be only in the pre-trial stage and against the voting in the Human Rights Council. Okay, when the inquiry is not completed, and then it is like kindly without being completing the due process, the voting has been passed, and then suspension of Russia from the Human Rights Council. Whereas there has been cases of allegation against USA, also certain human rights violation, and especially in the case of ICC, the one thing that everyone needs to be keep it in mind that USA itself has faced a case of war crimes against war crime cases was filed against USA for war atrocities committed by American soldiers in Afghanistan. And accordingly, after that, Donald Trump has issued a kind of an arrest warrant against a sanction against the prosecutors of ICC. So we find kind of a double standard everywhere in when we talk about following the rule-based international order. Everyone within the system tries to maximize their national interests, and they will, every nation state will follow the rule-based international order as long as it is conducive to their national interest, as long as it satisfies, as long as it is in conformity to their treaties. If the rule-based international order is helping them in protecting their national interests, if it is helping them in preserving their national interests, if it is helping them in promoting their national interests, they will remain within the framework. The moment the framework becomes a kind of a challenge to them in maintaining their national interests, in maximizing their national interests, the nation states start moving away from the rule-based international order. Yeah, Rajan, I think I'm done.
Yeah. Ma'am, what would be India's position when it comes to relationship with the West now?
Coming to the question of India's position towards the West. Now, in this context, there's been quite a lot of pressure on India to take a stand. I mean, in a sense, like take a stand in a sense of not maintaining our neutrality. Like I have been saying from the beginning of our independence, we have been jealously guarding our autonomy in foreign policy decision making. So this is something we have been doing it from the very beginning. And today also we have been trying to do. The West is putting pressure on India, going to the extent of saying that you are the world's largest democracy, so you need to have a kind of a support for a rule-based international order. India is not denying that. India is saying that yes, we are for a rule-based international order. However, the due process has to take in place. The diplomacy is to take in place. Now, for instance, the diplomacy matter, for instance, the diplomacy matter is coming in its Article 2, Clause 3. In fact, if you go, when India is talking about that a diplomatic way is to be followed for finding a solution between India and between Russia and Ukraine, actually India is going by UN Charter, which imposes an obligation on all member states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means, by way of diplomacy. So what India's stand is that, number one, diplomatic means should be employed to find a solution to the problems. Sanctions may create more issues. Sanctions might result, European Union sanction or NATO countries sanctions will result in probably more issues for, or it will it will make the conflict more difficult to settle. So this is what is India's continuous stand. Second thing, India is also driven by her national interest. India cannot be away from the reality that Russia has been our time-tested friend. Okay, Russia has been standing with India whenever it's as a veto power, veto welding member state. Russia has been standing with India when India went for the nuclear option in 1971, when the sanction was imposed on India. That time also Russia stood by India. So India, for Russia, and Indian relationship is a time-tested friendship. How much we can trust the Western world? So like moving away from dependency, defense dependency on Russia, then moving away to West, it will not help in India's national interest. India has to be self-dependency has to be there in case of defense sector. But for that, India needs the technology. Russia is willing to give technology to India, import technology to India. Will the Western world be willing to give Indian the military technology to India and at a competitive rate? The defense, if we move away from defense equipment, our reliance on in Russia for defense need to the West, we find that the competitive advantage is not given. Russia gives quite a lot of advances to India. So at this moment, India's national interest demands that India has to be with Russia, a veto welding power, because we are not very confident about US interests. So nowhere they're saying that we are going to provide you a kind of a competitive advantage in terms of technology transfer. They're not talking about technology transfer. If we want to have a startup, are they talking about technology transfer? They are not talking about it, whereas Russia is willing to do that. So at this moment, India's national interest demands that India remains within the framework of the UN Charter. So go to Article 2 and 3. Article 2, subclause 3, emphasize on diplomatic means, emphasize on due process of law, and that is what India is doing. So remaining within the framework of international UN Charter and insisting on finding a solution to the conflict by way of diplomacy. And even on the issue of Russia's suspension from the Human Rights Council, India took the position of due process of law. It cited that when the Commission of Inquiry report has not come, so it is premature to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. So far, India's action in the matter of Russian invasion of Ukraine is within the framework of UN Charter. And then another important thing we have to remember is that will the West go to the extent of imposing sanction in India for not taking a side with the West? I don't think it is a possibility, because India has already proved her credibility as a responsible power. Like, we are not the 5 Ps, but we have established our credibility as a responsible nuclear power. So in spite of not being the de jure nuclear power, we are a de facto nuclear power. And in fact, our reliability, our responsibility in the nuclear weapon category, military capability in terms of nuclear weapons, have resulted in signing of civil nuclear cooperation treaty between US with US or with Japan and so many other nuclear supply groups countries. So India's credibility as a responsible power in the world is already established. So India do not have to worry about not being with the West and fearing that some kind of a sanction can come on India for not taking a stand. India's national interest demands that India should do things in accordance to the UN Charter. So we have to keep on talking about that, find a solution to the issue by diplomatic means, due process of law, which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been tactfully doing so far. Of course, it is still unfolding. We have to wait and see how things move. And I think, Raj, there was a question on the chat box, but I've not been able to read that question. Can you read the question in the chat box? Because I've
Sure,
not been
ma'am.
able to access those questions.
The question I can see is, what if in the hierarchy of law, a country starts prioritizing its domestic laws over international law? Would that make UN bodies like ICC and ICJ redundant?
Come again, what did you say? Hierarchy of international law?
Yeah. If a country starts prioritizing its domestic laws over international law, would that make the UN bodies like ICC and ICJ redundant?
Okay. Yes, now I'll tell you the whole idea of all these judicial organ, whether, especially let's go to ICC, International Criminal Court, Rome Statute 2002 is started. Now, like the European Courts of Human Rights, ICC can only tie individuals. Now, ICC is supposed to be the last resort. The domestic courts are supposed to deal with cases of genocide, war crimes, crime against humanity, acts of aggression. And only when the domestic courts unable or unwilling, the matter can go design. Okay. In case of ICJ also, the matters can come to the ICJ by way of consent of the disputant states. It cannot come to the ICJ if the disputant states do not agree to it. The whole system was designed like this. Now, what happens if states making domestic laws in order to replace international law, keeping in mind the national interest? Like, for instance, India has done that. Under the WTO, certain requirements that India is no, so there are certain requirements, certain obligation imposed on the member states, and India has deviated from it. Like, for instance, the Food Security Act, the distribution of food grains, which under the WTO regime, India is not required to do. But however, India has done it because national interest of India has demanded it. So the question that you are asking, that if states keep on giving, member states keep on giving importance to domestic law over international law, will it create a kind of a threat to the rule-based international order? I will say the objective of international law was never to regulate or control the behavior of nation states. The behavior of nation states can never be controlled or regulated like the domestic law regulates or controls the behavior of the citizens. Because the law is applicable to sovereign states, they are all equal sovereigns. The whole idea of rule-based international order, the whole idea of international law, whether arising from treaty law, whether arising from customary state practice, is only to facilitate cooperation. It is only to establish a rule-based international order in order to facilitate cooperation, in order to build up cooperation, collaboration, minimize conflict, not total elimination, minimize conflict. So therefore, the international, it will always happen. Domestic law making in conformity to national interests will always take precedence over international law. However, it will not be a threat to, it will not be an existential threat. Because you were asking, will it end the organs like ICC or ICJ? I would say that it will not be, it will not end that ICC or ICJ, because the objective was not that. The objective of international law was never to control or regulate the behavior of the nation states. It was only to see a rule-based international order is there, whereby cooperation can be built up, whereby conflicted situation can be minimized. That was the objective. So we always have to keep that objective in mind whenever we look at the idea of a rule-based international order.
There's another question, ma'am. Will the Russian invasion of Ukraine instigate a chain reaction where another superpower would move forward and target other countries under the pretext of humanitarian causes?
See, the idea of there has been always a fear that will the Russian action encourage PRC particularly, because PRC has a interest in Taiwan. So the question that we often hear is that will there be a kind of a Taiwan like will Russia do a you know will there be a repeat of Ukraine in Taiwan? This is the question that has been always asked. Okay, what I want to say is that how will this situation, will this kind of a situation encourage other autocratic rulers, to autocratic government heads to go for a similar action? However, we need to remember is that there are a lot at stake. How many states will be able to stand the sanction imposed by the international community? That is the biggest question, because UNSC, although UNSC will not be able to take enforcement actions, the block-wise enforcement measures can be taken, and Russia is already facing sanction. So therefore, there are certain mechanisms in their place which acts as a deterrent, from behaving in an irresponsible manner. So the question of will China do a because mostly the fear is that will China do a Ukraine in Taiwan? This question, if you look at it, China has got lot at stake. China is into the global market, very closely linked to the global world. And then whether China will afford to alienate itself from the global market and will be able to, go ahead with the sanctions that might come for a possible similar like action on Taiwan. Because especially with the current situation in China, of course, the COVID pandemic situation is already there. But apart from that, the realty sector, the recession in the realty sector is creating a kind of a huge kind of difficulty in case of PRC. So at this moment, for another authoritarian reason, like with national interests, because like Russia, China is also an expansionist power. So I can think the comparison, if you are asking me to think of a similar similar power, so I can think only of PRC, because like Russia, PRC also have got territorial ambition. Like Russia, China also has got expansionist goal. Like Russia, China has a territorial ambition on Taiwan. It comes on under one China policy. Now, question is, will China dare to do a Ukraine in Taiwan? And to my mind, probably China will not do at this moment. At this moment, immediately it will not do. But then, of course, it might create a kind of a precedent in future. But only the future can say. However, sanctions by the international community is not something which not every nation state can afford to sustain for long. So that is one thing that we have to keep it in mind when we deal with questions of whether it will give a kind of a whether it will encourage other nation states to engage in similar kind of an actions. But however, only time can tell. Only time can tell this question. Only time will be the best to give an answer to this question. Only analysis I can give and say that probably taking into account China's domestic requirements, taking into account the economic needs of China, probably China, a power like Russia with equal territorial ambition, with equal expansionist goal, will not dare to do, at this moment at least, a Ukraine in Taiwan.
There's another question, ma'am. To what extent would the ADR mechanism work out to resolve the contentious international dispute?
Sorry, come again?
To what extent would the ADR mechanism
Yeah.
work out to resolve the contentious international?
Yes, correct. So I have told you that the Pacific settlement of disputes is provided in Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. And that Chapter 6 is all about finding a solution to any conflict, minimizing the conflict by way of Pacific settlement by use of peaceful means, either by negotiation, mediation, conciliation, or arbitration. Okay. And last is by going to the ICJ. However, the possibility of the diplomatic route, we have seen the negotiation being conducted between Russia and China. At this moment, if in the game theory language, if you go by international relations game theory language, the negotiation that is happening between Ukraine and Russia, it is looking like a zero-sum game. Russia is expecting Ukraine to give up everything. Like you give up your membership of NATO, you do not take NATO membership, and you do not take European Union membership. And whereas negotiations, in order to be a lasting solution, has to be a variable sum game in which everyone gains a little. But in this, the language that Russia is speaking at this moment is a zero-sum game. My gain is your loss. So whatever Ukraine was doing, keeping in mind her national interest, taking the NATO membership or taking the European Union membership, because they were already fearing that pro-Russian rule will be imposed on Ukraine. So Ukraine will be just a satellite state. How the Soviet satellite states were there in Eastern Europe, and Ukraine doesn't want to be a repetition of the Soviet satellite state existence. So they don't want to be there. They want to be like a full-fledged sovereign state having the right to determine our political destiny. So they should have the right to decide what political organization they want to do. So if there has to be negotiation, alternative dispute resolution, so the first step that they have been initiated is the negotiation. But when I look at the negotiation process, the way the negotiation process is going, it is entirely a zero-sum game. Like Russia is expecting Ukraine to give up everything. So accordingly, they have done the ceasefire. They have moved away from Kiev. Now the concentration is on the east and the south. Okay. But however, that way a negotiation can never be successful. Like you expect the other side to give up everything. And even if a solution is devised, that solution will be short-lived and the success of the solution will be very remote. A settlement arising out of negotiation has the possibility of having a higher rate of success only when there is a kind of a gain to both the parties. Now, here I find two disputed states, and Russia is assisting Ukraine to certain things, which is like a kind of an existential threat to Ukraine. So, the possibility of finding a fair solution by way of negotiations appearing to be very remote unless and until Russia shows some kind of a flexibility. In the whole negotiation process. Yeah. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the last questions. Can we expect an overhaul in the UN structure in the aftermath of this invasion?
Sorry, come again.
Can we expect an overhaul in the UN structure in the aftermath of this invasion?
Yeah. See, this Russian invasion of Ukraine, once again, pointed out the UNSC's, the need for the UNSC reform. Okay, so whenever a veto-wielding member state, permanent member of the UN, indulges in kind of a violation of alleged violation of international law, the enforcement mechanism of UNSC can never take off because it will be vetoed by the permanent member. So whenever a kind of an international law violation is there, either by the permanent member itself or by any of its allies, like we have seen that in case of Syria, Russia, China coming to the rescue of Syria all the time. Okay, so obviously that demands a reform of the UNSC. Now, how the reform will go? That is the biggest question, because the UNSC is still is on the reality of the Second World War. What was the reality immediately after the Second World War? The contribution to the ending of the Second World War has resulted. We know why the UNSC, the five powers, veto privilege,
in fact, the granting of veto is itself is against the principle of sovereign equality, because that goes against the principle of sovereign equality, because the 5Ps have got a veto power which override the decisions of the other members. So itself, it goes against the principle of sovereign equality, but taking into account the reality immediately after the Second World War, this provision was made because there was a number of new states coming into existence immediately after that, immediately in the 1950, after the decolonization process in Asia, Africa, Latin America. So it was feared that a numerical majority will outnumber the 5Ps. So the veto provision was apparently made in order to protect and promote the interest of the member states. Now, the reality is far different. The 5 permanent members, they are not having that kind of a predominance like what they had at the time of the Second World War. So it calls for a reform of the UNSC, but how the reform will happen, it is too early to say, because if you look at it, there's no representation from the Asian world, in the sense like from the developing world, apart from China. Apart from China, there is no representation from the rest of the world, from the you can say emerging economies. Like India need to be given a representation, but when India, Brazil, and South Africa was offered the membership, they were offered the membership without a veto power, which obviously India did not accept. So it definitely calls for reform of the UNSC, but however, how the reform will happen, and that is something we need to see. But of course, when the UNSC cannot function, then we have the different blocs taking sanction against the violator, like we have seen in case of Syria, we have seen in case of ongoing conflict in Russia, European Union sanction and NATO sanction on Russia, and that is how the world system works. Once again, I will say there will be always a division among the members of the nation states regarding the implementation of international law. There will be always, there can never be agreement among the 193 member states of the world as to how international law has to be applied in a particular situation, because every state will look at the situation from the prism of their national interests. How, I mean, which side they will take, they will decide depending on how conducive their stand will be to their protection, promotion, and preservation of national interest. Yeah. Yes.
There are no more questions in the chat box. If
Yeah.
anyone wishes to ask any question, they can unmute themselves. Okay, I think there are no questions now. Drishik, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am, for the enlightening session. It was really great to hear everything you said, and also a heartfelt thank you for entertaining our questions in such great detail. And to proceed with the concluding remarks, I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce our Honorable Principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidya, ma'am, an academician, educator, social activist, and an able administrator whose vast experience in the field of academics and social service has placed her at the front lines of various social issues, affecting reforms and empowering people. Dr. Vaidya is also recipient of several awards, such as the Tejaswini Award, the Nation Builder Award, and the Superwoman 2020 Award. She has served as the head of Department of Law at NMB College of Arts, Commerce and Law at Gondia, and has acted the principal of Gokhale Education Society's N.V. Thakur Law College, Nashik, before finally taking up the responsibility of principal of Government Law College, Mumbai. As an accomplished leader, Dr. Vaidya has won over the hearts of all students at GLC with her enthusiasm and efforts to introduce a variety of programs and courses
Thank you so much.
commemorating 75 years of independence. I request ma'am to speak a few words on this occasion.
Thank you. Respected Raja sir, all other students present here, and most importantly, Dr. Naushika madam, very good evening to all.
Good evening. Good evening.
It was really very interesting to continuously understand whatever you have discussed about based on the rule-based international order on the Russian invasion on Ukraine. What I understood, because I am basically a student of law, and to understand international relations is really a challenge for me also. So whatever you have explained regarding the US State Department alumni, regarding the Russia invasion, then issues attached to it, like human rights, international relations between India and USA, as well as India and Russia, and focused on the relations between mainly why we should go for India and Russia friendship, or why should we continue with it. So, and most importantly, you have focused on the UN Charter, focused on 3 C's like conflict, collaboration, and competition. Similarly, the protection, preservation, and promotion. And 2 sovereign states who actually indulge in war, what should be the solution to come out of it? I think this discussion will definitely help our students, and it has definitely added to my knowledge. So I appreciate your way of explanation, madam.
Thank you.
I
Thank
also
you.
appreciate PCGT and PP Raja sir, particularly Raja sir, for taking his initiative for having discussion on very recent topic. So I really thankful to all of you for making us the part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words. I thank everyone, including the audience, to attend this session, and we had a great discussion with ma'am regarding the topic. Now, before we conclude, I would like everyone to stand up for the national anthem.
पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल गंगा हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे.
Before we end the meeting, I am sending a link on the chat box. Participants, you all are requested to kindly feed the link. It's a feedback form for our attendance purposes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Raj. Can I done?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, I have sent the link. Kindly fill it up or copy it before you leave the meeting. Thank you, Drishik. You did a great job.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Always. We shall end the meeting now.